Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Grierson. I'm a contributing editor at Backstage and the vice president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this Q&A. And now, without further ado, I'd like to bring to the stage the star and the filmmaker of Boyhood, Ellar Coltrane, and Richard Linklater.
Hello.
Well, thank you both for being here very much. Congratulations on this movie. The first thing I wanted to ask about is to Rick. It's now been just over a year since this film premiered.
A year and one day.
A year and one day.
Yeah, last night.
And, you know, being at Sundance last year, this was sort of a late entry, one of the last films to be announced. And I'm curious, how soon from that first screening was the film finished at that stage? Was it a week? How quickly were you guys kind of going down to the wire to finish the film for Sundance?
Well, that's the great thing now with digital projection. It used to be people showing up to Sundance and festivals with the last thing was with your lab. The joke was you're showing up with the print that's still wet, And now you can kind of cut through all that. We did some color timing, a temp sound mix. We didn't even have all the rights to all the songs yet. And it was like, oh, let's show it at Sundance, And so I didn't really finish the film until much later, March, April. We ended up showing it at South by, but it wasn't finished till, you can kind of do that now. So, because we weren't coming out till the summer, so we actually got our final, so it dragged on for a long time, mostly to do with music rights.
And in terms of those first screenings for Ellar, you've been working on this project for 12 years, but most people, of course, didn't know about it. Those first screenings, finally kind of having your face out there in terms of people recognizing you, what was that first experience like in terms of people coming up to you for the first time after Boyhood started screening?
Yeah, I mean, it because I hadn't, I never watched, that was the first time I watched it too. I mean, not exactly, but I had seen it for the first time about a month before that. I never saw any of the footage or anything, so and you're right, you kind of try to tell people about it, but it's, no one really cared. Because it's, it's a weird thing to try to explain, usually it's like if the description of a movie plot takes more than 10 minutes, it's no one listens. Yeah, more than a minute, and it's like it takes a while to kind of get that point across with no reference, when no one has, all they know is what I'm telling them. So it was very strange. It was very strange to see it, see it at all, but then to see it with an audience, and kind of, and because of that, because I hadn't seen any of it, the idea of it as an actual film and of anyone seeing it was very abstract. For most of the 12 years, it was just kind of this art project, and to be in a room with however many 100 people and just feel all the things that they tense up about and laugh at, things that I think we see in a pretty different way, but it was amazing, and I mean the way people express their connection and the way that the things that the film meant to them is overwhelming but very inspiring.
I remember we didn't introduce you before the movie, Ellar or Lorelei. Patricia and Ethan and I think got up, and then when you came out after, it was like everybody went crazy, like because they saw you grow up, and then there you were. It was just like we didn't give away where they were going, so there was just that moment, and it was really just those first couple screenings before people might have seen a picture of you, or so they could have that kind of pure moment.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense now thinking back on it, because that first time I think most people see Boyhood, there might be a concern, is something going to happen to one of these characters, is something horrible or tragic? And so to sort of hide him until the end,
We had this perverse game. Remember we played? Once he was in high school and kind of witty and cynical, we was like, how's this movie going to end? Remember?
How many different ways to Mason die.
He's just walking down the street and he gets hit by a car. End of movie. You know, like we
Just watch
in
him
between
bleed
takes
out
when
for
we
the
had
last
some
half
time,
hour.
we'd rail out all these really. We should have actually filmed them and put them as DVD extras, and just like have the 10 alternate endings.
That's where Mason just gets stabbed, and then
Yeah,
the last half
my
hour
favorite
is
was you
him
bleed out in real
bleeding
time.
out.
We were a little going crazy there at the end, I think so.
So
It
Ellar,
would have been
when,
so cruel, like oh. There were others, you know. You go off to war, you know.
You watch him grow up, and you watch his eyes go dead.
I know. The grandfather does give you that gun, so who knows where that's going, you know. So.
when, for a lot of writers, in terms of their projects, they have an idea somewhat, maybe where they want this thing to end. With something like this, when you know it's going to be a 12-year project, I'm curious how much of an ending did you have, other than he graduates from high school? Was it as simple as that, or where did you end at the beginning?
That was the first thought. You know, the 12-year grid of 1st through 12th grade. He goes off to college, leaves family and home, you know, behind. That, to me, that was always the structure. But I think by about the second year, I had it in mind, the exact shot. Like he would meet someone, and it would kind of mirror the first shot of the movie when we first see we kind of like are pulling out of just a little boom up. I thought, oh, maybe we'll push in, but he'll be with someone else, and they'll be off at college. It'll just be at a different. So that kind of bookend hit me, and so I knew the end, you know, pretty much all the way, but I didn't have the exact dialogues worked out till closer to it, like real close. Like I always say, 10 years before I knew the shot. You know, 10 hours before. I think we were still getting it just right. You know,
With a 12-year span, you've mentioned before that because your own experience in terms of growing up in the 12 years being school, and that's like a really kind of profound period. But, other films that you've worked on, of course, the Before trilogy, and even Dazed and Confused, are all about, in one way or another, time or the passage of time. Has that something that since you've been young that you have thought about, that it's just sort of interests you as an artist and a filmmaker?
time. Well, yeah, I remember even as a kid thinking just relative to, time. I was really into science and just, once you realize how long the universe has been here, and that's changed over my life, how long we think we've been here, just how long, I don't know, I was kind of mysterious. And then our place in time, and then how long a life is. And I think dramatically, I think I was always trying to carve out like little pieces of time. So a lot of the movies are kind of limited time, like ancient Greek theater. It's always 24 hours or less. So it just seemed natural to me to tell a story in kind of a limited amount of time. But this movie sort of blows away that, in the amount of time. So if you average them all, I'm back to normal, I think, with the...
Ellar, the first conversation that you had with Rick about this project, I'm curious because being so young, it was hard to know who this character was. So how do you talk with the director, and Rick, how did you talk with him about who this guy was? Was it sort of, well, we'll figure it out as we go along, and we're going to kind of take this leap of faith, or what was the conversation like?
I don't know. I think that's more of a question for Rick. I was 6.
Ellar's saying he doesn't remember, basically.
But
we unearthed the video recently, though, right about.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of a direct kind of conversation about that there was in the beginning. I think that kind of unfolded as we went along. Because as a kid, you're kind of, everyone. It's really easy to pretend and kind of.
You were excited to have an older sibling.
Be someone else, and have this other family. And
at that point, Lorelei and Ellar were both only kids in their own families, so I think both of you were excited to have this sibling thing. And the interview we saw that we hadn't, we shot a little interview right before the first year, and we didn't see it till recently. But both of you were excited. The idea that you'd be fighting a lot, you like that, and you guys picked up with that sibling thing immediately. But you were excited about as much as a 6 or 7-year-old can conceive such a long project. You seemed always aboard. You were ready to go. So,
I think the idea of like Mason as a character is that evolved as we went along and as I got older. It's not something I think wisely, probably not something that he was trying to really make me think about as a 6 and a 7-year-old. And as I got older and had, more of my own personality to draw from, that's, we started to talk more about that.
It's definitely not Eller at the beginning of the movie, really. He's so much more like cool and advanced than that. He's kind of, both Lorelei and Eller, we had kind of make them more, I don't know, more normal, I think, than they really were. They would never dress like that, but we were just kind of, I was trying to go for, I don't know, less, I mean, he was listening to, also in this interview, I was like, well, what are you listening to? And he's listening to like 9 Inch Nails, and his taste was like a cool 15-year-old. He had, and Lorelei said in that thing, she said she liked you, but you dressed like a teenager. He had holes
really
in his,
does. He dresses
she's
like
kind
a
of
teenager.
She didn't like that at all. Holes in your jeans, and I don't know. It was like we'd go into a school, and like all the kids would just sort of flock around Eller and follow him around and stuff. He's like had this kind of rock star quality, but we had to really suppress that. I didn't want that, but that could come out
Healthy.
Yeah, as the film went, I knew it would merge with who he really was at some point. It would be him. That's him at the end of the movie, to in my mind. But that's not it. It's not him at the beginning.
Eller, do you feel that way about Mason and you?
Doesn't matter what.
It's not my movie.
You haven't.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's definitely a lot of me that I was able to use more and more as we went along, as I had more going on in my head and more to offer. The character required that, so it just kind of happened naturally that more of my life and experiences, and I mean it just kind of more of my opinions and reactions to things, I guess, were became a part of Mason.
And you were saying earlier about this cool art project that you guys were sort of working on. I'm curious for you, Eller, if it happened, that moment of realization about someday this is going to be a finished film and someday people are going to actually see this thing. It's not just a thing that we're doing every year for a couple of weeks. This is going to be a film. Do you remember that moment of realization for you?
I mean, I'm just now coming to terms with that, I think. But then the first screening was the first time I watched it was very surprising that seeing it on a screen and then seeing it with an audience. But I mean, I think a couple years out, Richard was kind of trying to prepare me for that no one was going to care about this movie, and that it's it's really special to us, but no.
Yeah, I was going the other way, quite the opposite of what ends up happening. But I was really trying to prepare him, I've done a lot of these films, and you're just lucky to get them made. Yeah. This means a lot, but don't expect I remember just telling you explain to me this movie, and about a minute in, like he was talking about earlier, I was like, okay, stop right there. That's why no one's ever going to see this movie, because you can't really describe it, and it's someone grows up, and movies need a thing, and we don't have that. So just maybe we'll play some festivals, maybe it'll play, but just. Let's take what we have, and from the experience, and that'll be it. And it's wonderful. It's our movie. But I was trying to just don't think something great's gonna, happen. And I was just trying to protect them. But I hadn't really. It was right in front of us. I never thought that the pitch, the conception, the high concept idea that we had right in front of us, that we filmed over 12 years, you see, that alone described something you hadn't necessarily seen before. Yeah. So that became a hook in itself, but it was there all along, but it never crossed my mind that would be the first thing you described about the movie, but I should have known that. I just wasn't thinking that way.
Well, in terms of the history of the project, in terms of the chronology, the early 21st century, you make Waking Life, you make Tape, 2003, School of Rock comes out. When did the germ of this idea Was it before Waking Life, or when did this
Yeah.
actually start for you?
Well, I mean, the germ started before that, probably in the late 90s. I'd been a parent for about 6 or 7 years, I think. And I was just, how a story just kind of creeps into your system. And I was like, I want to make a film about childhood. Having had a kid and thought so much about my own childhood and what that's like, and parenting too. So I felt there was a story. I had one, because I never thought I'd make a film about kids, at that point in my life. But then I suddenly felt like, oh, okay, I have something to say about this. And so I just kind of swing around in my head for probably until, I think the big idea came, it was in '01, probably spring of '01. I had finished Tape and Waking Life, one animated, one live action. They just sort of came to the finish line at the same time. And I remember pitching this idea. That spring, I started talking to Ethan, and then I talked to Patricia about it, and they came aboard. And I pitched it to Jonathan Searing at IFC, who had done both those films, by the way. They were involved in both those movies, just as the next film. And I just had that idea after almost giving up on it, because I couldn't pick that one point of childhood. If you think about it, kids, you're limited in a kid's film in the representation, because you just have their physicality at the age you're showing them, and you can't ask them to be 3 years older or play 3 years older, much less 5, 10. And like, my ideas were all over the map. I didn't have that one moment, so I'd kind of given up because I was trying to express all of it. So this form, I think, because I was thinking about it for those couple years, and I think this way anyway about time and narrative a lot, so it solved my narrative problem. This form kind of came to me like, I just saw the finished film, like, everyone in it's, the kids are growing up, their parents are aging, and that was the movie. So the form came to me, so I was excited about that. I mean, it was such a logistically crazy idea that I had to, really explain how it would work. And Jonathan Searing at IFC said, cool. I think let's do it. So, and he ends up not only still at IFC, but he's distributing the movie, and all the passion he felt for it over the year, he's still so involved. We had a lucky star this whole way, just got so lucky. On the casting of Ellar, everything worked out so well. It was just, sometimes things are meant to be, and the world kind of aligns with what you're doing, and sometimes you feel resistance, to what you're trying to do. So this one was kind of blessed, things worked out, constantly.
We have several questions from the audience, and a couple of them I want to kind of dovetail on what you're talking about right now. One is, in terms of challenges for this project, it's 12 years. What were there subplots or plot lines that, as you're mapping this out, had to kind of go away, or you decided to de-emphasize from year to year? How do you know sort of what to keep and what things? Are there scenes or segments of Boyhood that just didn't work and they just had to be cut?
No, not really. The evolution of it came so gradually. It would be like I probably ended up cutting more of the first year, just mainly because it was really long the first year. I think we were figuring out what the film could contain. The first year, probably like 23 minutes long initially. So we probably gave that first bit more attention. And I cut out a few things that didn't really take off, I thought, thematically, just a conversation, or I cut a few conversations shorter. Some things I thought might explore, but I was kind of imposing a little too much on the movie. So just minor things no one would even remember. But I had all that time to kind of feel if this was working or not. But there's very little cut out, really. Only a handful of scenes. People imagine sometimes that there's a whole nother movie, or it's a 6-hour version, or no, we didn't have that kind of time or money. It was very specific. Every year we usually shot for about 3 days, and it was really intense. But we had a year of planning and thinking about it. So it's like we did it, and we certainly trimmed within scenes, but very few were cut out completely. One transition between years 1 and 2 I cut completely, like between years 11 and 12. So it's pretty wild to be able to go back and something you shot 10 years earlier, and still be playing with it. But that's kind of what this structure afforded us, all that time. So I wanted to use all that time. It was our co-collaborator, our secret sauce, to have all that time. Yeah.
Eller, starting out, in year one and now to where you are now, in terms of being an actor, is acting something that's still a primary interest for you? Do you have other passions that you're more interested in pursuing than acting? I know you were in Fast Food Nation, I believe, as well, but I'm curious now that you've done this 12-year project, are you pining to do more acting, or are there other things that you're more interested in pursuing now?
Yeah, at this point, I really want to work. This has been a crazy year, and I definitely would like to I want to kind of throw myself into something, and acting is definitely something I enjoy, and I kind of increasingly have opportunities it seems, to do that. So it's definitely something I'm pursuing, but there's also a lot that I'm interested in. So I imagine I'll take long breaks if I do find a career in acting. I'll probably take a lot of time to do other things as well. I haven't, unlike Mason, I'm not in college, so I still need to do that. People keep asking me if I'm in school right now, and it's like, when would I be in school right now?
In interviews, Ethan Hawke has talked about the fact that he has always felt not parental, but he always wanted to kind of take you under his wing in terms of talking about being an actor. And I'm curious if the two of you, if he's given you advice, given you suggestions about a career path going forward in terms of acting, or any sort of advice of any kind that he's shared with you.
I mean, you had to take a break and go to school and not become an actor right now, which I don't know if I'm exactly heeding that advice, but I do enjoy solitude, and I think that's something that a lot of performers kind of give up, and I think it's very valuable to spend time working on only yourself, and that's definitely probably the most valuable thing Ethan has told me. Is just, it's something I already knew, and I was kind of gravitating towards, like, instead of taking these opportunities, like, oh, I know I'm gonna go hang out in the desert for a while, where I can't hear anyone or see anyone. But just to have him kind of encourage me to do that and say that my instincts are correct, and that it would be, it's good to take care of yourself.
Because I really feel like for you, I'm curious how you feel about this, but in terms of the cast of this film, the other actors, because they're older, they've had experience being in movies, doing press, sort of dealing with all that, but this is all very fresh for you. Like you said, this has been kind of a crazy year. Do you feel like your life has sort of incredibly changed? Do you feel like, in terms of retaining yourself, like you were saying before, do you feel like you've been able to do that as this year has gone on? What's it been like to sort of go through this process all year of doing Q&As and talking with the press about this movie?
I think I'll only entirely know in about a month and a half from now, when it's supposedly now after the Oscars, I guess I'll have some semblance of a life again. But I don't know. I think I've done a pretty good job of remaining myself, but you also, the definition of who yourself is changes constantly, whether you're doing this or not. So it's difficult to know, really. But, spending a lot of time alone, and, I wasn't joking about the desert. That desert where we finished, where we shot the last scene of Boyhood is a really large part of my life, and it's very quiet out there, and there's nothing helps kind of quiet the roar of Hollywood, like just being somewhere where you literally can hear the wind all day.
Yeah, we left. We all went back to Austin. Eller stayed. He's a young man who can do whatever he wants, and it was kind of amazing. I'm very proud of Eller and how centered he is and how in himself he is. I think we all took that kind of interest, Patricia, Ethan, and myself, because it's for both Lorelei and Eller. It was kind of a weird, powerful thing. Not many actors have ever been in that position, being kind of shown in this parallel life, fictional character, but to be documented in such a way. So I'm just really proud the way he's, handled it and been himself, and the way, that thoughtful, mysterious, sensitive young 7-year-old that in year one became this kind of, he's the same guy, just a young man. So it's been a beautiful thing to behold,
Rick, in terms of sort of using Texas as the backdrop for this movie and sort of choosing different locations and deciding things, I guess I'm curious what happened first. Was it wanting to shoot in certain cities and certain locations, or this is the budget, we have to kind of make this work? How did it work in terms of finding locations around the state?
Yeah, well, this film's really personal, and I'm one of those people. I didn't have any money growing up. I never left Texas till I was like about in my early 20s. So I kind of thought it was landlocked in that way. But fortunately, Texas is a really big state, and it has a lot of different looks. So you kind of go around it, and it gave us a chance to explore it. The big city, the small town, East Texas, West Texas. Because I remember kind of being at those locations growing up for different reasons. But I mean, it's just practical. But storytelling-wise, I really believe in the specific. If you really locate a thing, that people, no matter where you live in the world, you can relate to the specifics that that are in the story, just because it's real to somebody. It's real to the storyteller. So I didn't want it to be kind of a vague anywhere USA thing. I really wanted it to be, because some films I go the other way. It's not really said anywhere. But this one I thought was important because it's as important as that little house you grow up in. It's very location specific. And as you recall your own life, it's like, oh, we moved from here and here. It's that kind of demarcates your life as you remember it. All the moves and where you were at what age, and that's all very important. So I wanted that to be real. In the end, I actually didn't spend much time in West Texas. I got to know that as an older, person, but how beautiful it is, and it's so otherworldly. And the idea hit me, because I knew the last shot. He goes to college, and he meets a girl, and that's kind of the end of the movie. But I didn't really know where. That was a few years out from, it was like, well, where's he going to go to college? Maybe it was like 4 or 5 years before we got there. I started thinking that would be the way to end it. He's driving off like a Western hero, into the sunset, heading west. Open country, so that started to take hold visually. And so we filmed at a little school right there near Big Bend. And it was wonderful.
One of the questions from the audience was in terms of, Rick, for your process of working with actors. Someone like Ethan Hawke you've worked with for years and years, but with someone that you're working with for the first time, is it more important in terms of a connection, a feeling that you have about that actor? Is it technique? The question was sort of specifically because I'm wondering what you use to sort of determine this person I can work with. This is someone I want to have in my film.
Yeah, casting is such an important kind of intuitive process. You kind of usually know what you're looking for when you meet them. You have something in mind, but I never try to be too specific. Because I want to adapt it to that person, whoever it is. But you know it when you feel it. So you have to kind of trust that. But a lot of my rehearsal, and I'm very rehearsal intensive, but it's not like acting exercises as much as it is really getting to know one another and really exploring that character and the story. And I'm one of these cards on the table. Let's talk about everything. I'll answer every question. Let's take a trip together with this character and see where it takes us, So I really am looking for that kind of connection and collaboration on each character, as much as possible, So I think it's important to take that time. I have that. My insecurity dream I have as a filmmaker is that I'm on the set and I haven't met the cast yet, and we're about to film. Yeah. That's like, like. Here's who's playing, like, okay, rolling. I'm like, what? I mean, that's my thing. Like, I don't know them well enough yet. So,
with a more traditional sort of shoot, sometimes you'll hear stories about people who work on a set saying, well, everything went wrong and the film turned out great, or the opposite, we had such a great time working on this thing, but the movie just didn't work out. As a filmmaker making a movie in little bits and pieces for 12 years while making other movies at the same time, I'm curious for you, you were saying before about the insecurity dream. Do you sort of have to kind of put yourself in the same kind of headspace each year when filming this to kind of remember to have a sense of continuity in terms of just shooting it and how you're directing your actors, to kind of remember this is the flow of this film?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Like, do the other films or time interfere with this telling of this story? Because I wanted it to feel like one movie. I didn't want it to feel like 12 movies, even though technically it is kind of 12 movies, the way it's constructed. But I wanted it to just flow and feel like one thing. So that has to be done on every level. But it didn't, I don't think we ever spent any time kind of, readjusting or getting back into character I mean, it was a story we were telling and we really knew these people. So it was just so incremental, the growth. But personally, I would definitely watch the movie. We were editing as we went, Sandra and I would watch it as it grew. I maybe put it away for 6 months, and then just watch it alone at midnight, and think about it, and had all that time to think and gestate. And Sandra, my editor, she ends up a co-producer on the movie just because we spent so much time talking about it. Rarely does an editor get to contribute before you shoot in this, but we're like, is this working? Is this element? What does this need? I was just open for that in a storytelling way in the editing room, unlike anything I'll probably ever do again. It was really such an interesting storytelling process. To know the end, to have the story, but to be constantly kind of refining it and finding, and because we're collaborating with the unknown future. Yeah. Unknown but predictable. They will grow up. Everyone's going to age. We will get to an end. But you don't know the specifics. You don't know the specifics of the culture or how. I mean, I was very confident. People go, well, what if Ellar grew up to be a bad actor or a whatever they want to say is like a bad case scenario. I said, well, the film would have kind of incrementally probably gone in that direction to whatever degree, a little bit. It was sort of designed to do that. So, but it would have been slow. He would have very gradually become that, whatever. They say like a 270-pound wrestler or, hockey player, lacrosse player, whatever they want to say is the opposite of him.
And Ellar, in interviews, both Patricia and Ethan have talked about the fact that they didn't see each other very much during the shoot because, you're with one or the other. Because you're the sort of the connective tissue between the two of them, I'm curious about working with one actor and then working with the other actor. Were their styles somewhat similar as actors? Did you relate to them in different ways? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, as far as their styles as actors, I don't know exactly. That's it's not. I don't know that I know enough about acting to exactly, or I certainly didn't at that time. But my relationships with both of them was very different. I think Ethan's relationship with everyone is kind of, this like a sports team or something. And that's a really great way to kind of work and figure out who characters are and all of it. And Patricia, she's kind of she's a maternal force. I don't feel weird saying that, but but she is, she really is in every aspect of her life, and that was established pretty early on, that relationship of, or at least feeling comfortable, in this somewhat sort of maternal relationship. And for me and Lorelei, we kind of spent some time with just Patricia before starting shooting, and just did sort of like activities, to establish that relationship. And with Ethan, it almost felt, I think somewhat like it does, what it would for the characters, in that it's like he's this sort of mysterious character that it's like I met him a few times the first few years, and it was always great to, really exciting to like get to know him a little bit more, but he was still this sort of distant character, but as
he blows in with all that energy, like Dad's here, haven't seen him in a long time, but like,
and
boom.
that's very much Ethan.
Yeah, it definitely mirrored that. Patricia tells a great story about at Sundance, unlike Ethan, who saw quite a bit of the film, he wanted to. Patricia saw it probably year 5 or 6. I showed her everything, and just as we talked about the second half of the movie and her character, and she was okay with it. She didn't want to see everything. And even as we finished it, I showed it to Ellar and Lorelei and Ethan, and Patricia's like, I'll just wait and watch it with an audience. So her first time watching the movie was with 1,200 people a year ago, and she said, and I hadn't thought of this at all, but a lot of times, like the script, we weren't really publishing the whole script every year. It was like just scenes she's working on, and she never really knew what they did when, Ethan's character would come and take the kids. She didn't really know what they did. Maybe they heard something, or she didn't have all the information. Even the camping trip he was on, she didn't know exactly what they did at that camping, like to what degree he was lying to her or whatever. So she had this real maternal feeling like, oh no, I don't like those guys. He can't hang out with them. I'd never thought of that. But she said it really helped her get over whatever relationship she imagined they had, to realize, oh, he is a loving father. Whatever went on between them and whatever negativity she put onto him and them, that it made her realize. She said she wishes all couples that are separated could see them see their kids with the other, because it made her realize, like, oh, he's actually a good dad, or he's trying,
And Eller, you had said a couple times that you kind of only watched the movie at the end of the process. Did you see anything beforehand? Did you not want to, or did Rick not want you to see it? Were you curious about what it was looking like as the years were going on?
Yeah, he never offered, and I never really asked. So I don't know. I never thought about like I shouldn't or I should. It just kind of was this thing that it just never happened. And I mean, looking back, I think it was definitely the right decision. It was pretty weird to see at I guess 19 when I watched it, and I can't imagine at a young, how weird it would have been to see that and then go back and try to like become that character again and have this whole weird idea of it. Having seen it on a screen, it definitely changes your approach.
Popped our bubble a little bit too, as far as there was this thing we were doing every year, but it never came out. There was no, we never had to account for what we were doing. It was just this fun thing we did every year. You know what I mean? The film, you work on a film and then a year later it comes out and you got to deal with it. But we never had to do that here.
Yeah, it's a lot of space to have, to just be able to lose yourself in something and not have that anything dangling in front of you, that there is no
I like that
goal being focused on.
Because it makes it
the
very
goal is doing it.
Process. It's 100% process oriented. There was no goal. We didn't have a distributor at the time. We didn't know when. I couldn't have told you what year it's coming out. The end was so far away. It was to be abstract, the first half of the movie. So it was kind of a wonderful way to work. It just really made you focus on that year, that shot, that, very minimal.
And from a technical side, Rick, in terms of basically getting people to kind of sign on for a project that's 12 years long, because it seemed like that was something that you had to basically kind of invent, sort of how to do that sort of thing. How difficult was that in terms of getting people to commit for such a long time?
Well, I think the only, non-expendables were the main cast and myself. If everybody else was free to go. But a wonderful thing happened. The same crew was clamoring to come back every year. Like even people who remember our first location manager, he had moved on and he was producing like commercials and other things, but he would come back and location manage for us every year just to be around the kids it was this kind of wonderful family reunion every year, somewhere between family reunion and summer camp. And it wasn't always in the summer, it was whenever, but when we got back together, it was really special. But it's hard to coordinate, with particularly with Patricia and Ethan's schedules, my own schedule. So it was always this thing we had, we'd give ourselves about a month or two after we wrapped to just decompress. And then Kathleen would start calling me up, Sutherland, my producers, like, well, okay, when are we thinking next year? And then the logistical challenge was always there to get it all together. But that's just the practical considerations. I think the bigger challenges were probably more, psychological, just to settle in the patience required and to just accept that that's our story and find the fun in that kind of long-term nature of it, So, that's how we go through our lives. We have our long-term goals. Like especially the younger you are, something you're working for, whether it's through education or just the career of an artist. You're starting wherever you start, but it takes so long to really get where you want to go in almost everything. So as impatient as we are, it really demanded that kind of long-term patient. Filmmaking, let's face it, demands that to begin with, but this was just obviously a bigger version of that. But so it was kind of fun every year. It was like putting a puzzle together. There were always these little challenges, but like I said earlier, we were really blessed. Everything so went our way.
In terms of pieces of the puzzle, one of my favorite parts in this movie is, I don't remember the actor's name, but the gentleman who's helping Patricia Arquette with her house. And then she basically advises him about, going off in school. And he comes back many years later and says, your mother, she did a great thing for me. Did that actor came back into your life, or you thought it'd be great to have him? How did that work?
No, that wasn't, when cast. I was saying, and then we'll need you back in 5 years to, and people are like, sure. The grandmother, it's like, we need you years 2 and 3, and then we need you at the end. Yeah. And she said she loved that all the years. If you looked her up on IMDb, she had a film in production, so she's like, I'm always working. My call time's not for, 7 more years, but I'm getting there. So it was kind of, so that, Charlie Sexton, who plays Ethan's roommate, the musician who comes back, I didn't want to overdo it too much, but there were the way people kind of cycle back into your lives. As a kid, you'll run into other kids, or your parents' friends come back around. It's kind of wonderful. I didn't want to overdo it too much, but by the end, there is, you start, especially a graduation party or something. There's people from earlier in the film, and it was just kind of a wonderful thing to play with, But it's kind of fun to tell an actor, remember Charlie, the roommate. I said, and then at the end, they're gonna go see you play, and he's like, well, so see you in about 6 years, and he's like, all right, man, if I'm still alive, sure, like, like I'd run into him, like at his kid's birthday party. I said, Charlie, 2 more years. He's like, okay. So it was just a fun life project. It was just a fun thing to be kind of carrying around with us all these years, because it was so much about, 2 pretty fascinating subjects at least, growing up and parenting and growing up as a kid. So we could everything could kind of find its way into this movie,
Well, just, hearing you talk about it and just thinking about your films in general, I feel like one of the other kind of overriding things that happens in your films is they're about families or communities, whether it's Dazed and Confused or Me and Orson Welles, that you have these families that kind of are created. And it seems like in a lot of ways that Boyhood was sort of the ultimate family, that you had these people, you said they kept coming back every year for 12 years and like that. Are you somebody who do you enjoy communities like that? Do you sort of find yourself drawn to that as a person?
Yeah, and I think family's not even the right analogy, when people say, oh, we're like a family. Well, family you don't pick, family you're stuck with from birth, it's like, that can be good or bad, you feel that bond, but would you really be, well, I'm just saying, in the arts, we're with people we choose, like everything.
More like a team.
Yeah, you're there by choice. If you're not being fulfilled, you can you can leave. You can, you're all here. It's like friends are the family you choose. And I've always loved that. Just the idea of a troupe coming together to create something, and like a band, or that's why I didn't want to just be a writer. I learned that early on. I wanted to mix it up with people. I wanted to tell stories and to be a part of something much bigger, and work with a lot of people. The collaborative nature of filmmaking really struck me as so unique, So just love it. So yeah, I guess a lot of times in my movies you do see, people. I just shot a thing this fall, and it's the same thing. It's like a guy goes off to college, and immediately it's all his roommates, and it's an intense weekend, but it's this little immediate culture you find yourself in, and here are your new friends. So I guess I've returned to that a few times, but that's life, I guess. So.
In terms of, again, like a traditional project, you shoot it for maybe 2 months and then it's over, and then editing. You've talked about this a little bit before in the past, but I'd love to ask again about finally finishing the last shot of this and it being over. That you've done this thing for 12 years and it's over. And of course, you still have to work on editing, but you are finished shooting it. Did it hit immediately that it was over, or is it sort of a gradual process of, oh, this thing is now finally?
I mean, we had a moment. The last shot is the last shot in the movie. When we wrapped that end, when we were done in production, that was intense. The martini shot of that. You can imagine martini shot times, 12. So, but I think we're still processing it. To be honest, everything about this film was so unusual that the feelings about separating it from it have been unlike anything I've ever experienced. Even when people saw the movie, in the last year, and we opened in July, and it still hadn't been a year. We wrapped in October of last year, of 13, and we showed in January, so it was that quick we were able to do that. But I think we were all still processing. Now it's been more than a year since we shot last, and I think we're still we're starting to realize, oh, we're not shooting anymore. But it sounds crazy, but we look at each other and kind of go, yeah, I don't know. Patricia said she would trade everything in just to keep working on the movie. If we could never have stopped, just make it a 20, 30-year project all the way to the, again, that process sort of takes you over, and that's all we really love. So, but I mean, it's been wonderful, actually. The response has been so heartfelt, and kind of we've felt that resonance and that connection, which has been great. This thing we did so intimately, but it's it's still kind of a mysterious separation thing going on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was both an impact, I think, when at that moment, it was definitely very, that was a big moment, but it's kind of, we spent the last year reeling from that, and just starting to comprehend it.
And Ellar, for you as an actor, when you were starting this, you had done, I think, a play or a short film. You had done other sort of work. So I'm assuming that very early on in your life you thought acting sounds like something I would like to do. Is that something that you sort of fell into and it seemed you were interested in, or did you have sort of a burning passion when you were very, very young? Like, what was that like when you were very young?
I mean, both. I did a lot of theater when I was young. There's a theater in Austin called SAG-AFTRA that puts on productions with children. I did a lot of that. Like before I was 10, I was really little, and I definitely enjoyed that. I never really had thought about acting in films, but my aunt was a fashion model, and I did kind of entirely fall into it. I was just like at her agency with her one day, and someone picked me out of the crowd and was like, "You should come, do auditions for us." And I don't know. I definitely was excited, and I enjoyed it a lot. But I was also really bashful, so it was kind of. I was unsure if I even wanted to at first, but. And it kind of, I auditioned a lot for those first few years, and that as as I'm sure everyone here knows, that can be a grind. And so, I mean, I think whenever I got the part in this, over the next couple years, I mean, I was still doing some stuff, and I had some really, strange experiences, and just it sort of became more trouble than it was really worth, and just seemed like maybe I could devote all of my attention to this project, at least for the next decade or so, and not worry about auditioning for commercials and stuff. So it's something I haven't really thought about, the idea of myself as an actor until, this last year. I do have a lot of other interests, and I had a day job. I had a a very different life, 11 months ago. So it's been strange to kind of be sort of, approaching this point where I have a lot of opportunities to, to act and make films and whatever, to whatever capacity that means, I guess. So I don't know. I want to, though, so we'll see.
I always get offended when people said, "Oh, Ellar Coltrane, a non-actor." I said, he was an actor when I met him. He had a headshot, an agent. That was important. I wanted to get a kid who had already experienced that and had fun with it, had the family support to that. And it was important, too. I think a colleague of mine had worked with Ellar in this other film and told me, like, "Oh, yeah, he's cool. He's a good kid. His family's great." Like, just to hear a little something, that I remember that being one more positive in his column. A good report on him from another production. Yeah. People do talk.
It's funny because that actually leads to my next question. In terms of, you said you were auditioning in Austin and doing work in Austin beforehand. In terms of, my understanding is that in Texas, in terms of if you're an actor, whether you're in Dallas or Houston or Austin, you'll drive
it's
all over
so
the state to audition, and
it's
that's just normal.
It's one zone. It's one area. So actors get, you're driving to Dallas, and they team up, getting cars together, even if they're going up for the same part. A lot of these people just, let's both go. You get to know one another, and yeah, it's one area. So people are driving in. I always feel bad auditioning people. It's like, you drove into from Dallas just to meet. Like, that's the gig, man. It's tough. It's a big state. But
maybe that's why I didn't get many parts. My parents didn't drive me to Dallas every weekend, so
Dallas or Houston or
kind of what I could
wherever.
pick up around Austin. I mean, we definitely went around a few times, but for the most part, it was kind of. Yeah, that's kind of it's kind of a blessing and a strange thing. I think so many kind of kids in my position were being very pushed by their parents. A lot of the other actor kids I met, it was almost more their parents' ideas. They're more their parents' idea than their own. And I don't think I never had to deal with that. No. If anything, it was kind of like, come on, Mom, let's go. Go to the audition. So.
Early on in the conversation, Rick had talked about that Mason being in some ways different than you are. The same question I asked him, I want to ask you about coming back to this every year. Did you sort of have to put on that costume of who Mason was? Did you feel like he was different from you, and then kind of getting back into it every year? Was that an easy transition for you to get used to playing Mason again every year?
Yeah, well, it was very gradual. I mean, there was never a moment where it's like, okay, I'm getting back into this character now. I mean, it just, maybe we would be in contact throughout the year, so I would always sort of have, especially as I got older, I would sort of kind of have my finger on it to some degree of kind of thinking about who Mason was and, what parts of myself and my experiences might play into that. But then also, that like Richard described earlier, there was a pretty involved and kind of lengthy rehearsal process each year leading up to shooting. So, and that definitely that was what that was. Is rediscovering the character and kind of finding who he is within myself again. But it never felt like difficult or like, okay, I'm doing this now. It's just kind of this gradual thing and then we get there and it's because I've compared taken all these aspects of my own life and compared them to Mason and, written a lot or helped to write a lot of the dialogue. And so it's just kind of
Yeah.
it was right there once we,
As
were
I
on
got older,
camera.
I would give him assignments. I was like, okay, next year you're going to meet a girl at a party. So write down, if you end up in that situation, go home and write down like what you talked about. I want to do a very realistic scene, and you need to tell me more about you. And, so it was kind of pulling things out of him. It's like, I kind of love the part where he starts just talking, he starts having opinions. And I just saw the whole movie as this emergence of self, so, but, I had to, demand it. And so it was a wonderful collaboration. That was the most satisfying thing, to just, the kids grow up and become full-blown collaborators on the movie. So.
Well, Eller and Rick, thank you very much for the time. This movie is fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you very
So,
much.
yeah.
Have a good night.